I'm Jenny Gage, and this is Life Take Two. Hi, friends. It's the first time I've tried to use my voice in a few hours here. Hopefully, my strep throat infected vocal cords make it through this video. A 37-year-old nurse, recently identified as Alex Pretty, was killed on the streets of Minnesota earlier this morning. I've watched multiple videos from different angles. I'm not going to play any of those videos here. I know that you can find them in other places. As we're watching everything unfold in Minnesota, the brutal murder of Renee Good right after she dropped her son off at school, ICE agents eating lunch at a restaurant, being treated with respect and dignity by the staff, going back later and arresting one of the staff members, the abduction of the young child who was just coming home from kindergarten, and now this truly shocking killing earlier this morning of Alex. All of us are feeling the same thing, that we can't believe what we're watching. This doesn't seem right. Why is it okay for these agents to be roaming the streets and treating people in the way that they do? It feels completely wrong. And I personally never thought that I would live as an American citizen to see a dictatorship in which the rights of citizens were completely overlooked, and basic civil rights, forget the citizen part, civil rights ignored and just absolutely thrown in a dumpster fire. I never thought that I would live to see that day. It's kind of stunning every day. I have a very different way of viewing the world now that we are just embracing this full-blown dictatorship. But what's happening in Minnesota should not be happening at all, period. And there's a reason for this. The reason is that Border Patrol doesn't belong inside our cities. They're authorized and trained specifically to operate within about 100 miles of borders and shores, where the operations are very different than law enforcement operating inside cities. And this guy in particular, this little nut job, Greg Bovino, should never be face to face with US citizens inside urban areas. This guy is a nut job. As my followers know, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I don't think you have to be a psychiatrist to dig it all into this guy's life and think that there's a screw loose in there, and here he is just roaming the streets. Here's the part people don't clearly understand that's really important. What you're seeing in Minnesota isn't just ICE. It's also border control. And again, that feels wrong because border control was created to work the border. I live near the border. It's deserts, mountains, remote crossings, not American neighborhoods with kids, dogs, grocery stores, kindergartners. But under US law, Border Patrol falls under Customs and Border Protection, which is part of that greater Department of Homeland Security umbrella. And DHS, which is currently run by Kristi Noem, has been given extremely broad authority to enforce immigration laws far away from the actual border. This is kind of a gray area, but that's how you sometimes end up with Border Patrol being deployed thousands of miles away from an actual border. Legally, they're allowed to be away from the border, but here's the problem. What they're trained for and what they're being used for are not the same thing. Border Patrol is built around interdiction, stopping movement, controlling terrain, tracking, and overwhelming presence in, again, isolated areas, like what's 30 minutes away from my actual home, which is the middle of the desert, which is saguaros and choyas and venomous snakes and nothing, miles of nothing. That's what they're trained for. I have friends and neighbors who are border patrol. They are out there in the rough and the wild. And some of them consider that 100-mile perimeter from the border to be the unconstitutional zone because they behave in ways within that perimeter that, again, you wouldn't necessarily behave in a city. City law enforcement is very different than Border Patrol. Think of my Arizona desert, thick brush, highways at night. They are not primarily trained for urban crowd control, community policing, or constitutional, that word is so fucking important, constitutional de-escalation in dense civilian spaces. So when you put Border Patrol into a city protest, what you get is this. They treat Minneapolis like it's a stretch of remote borderland. That's how they see the world. That is what every cell in their body has been tactically trained for. This wild wasteland. That's the experience that they've always had. They treat protesters like they're smugglers or fugitives. They treat peaceful protesters who, as American citizens, have a lot to lose. They have everything to lose. So they're going to operate in a very law abiding way 99.9% of the time. Because a mom who's never had a criminal record, who just dropped her kids off at school, who has the anticipation that she's going to go back and pick her kids up from school, that mom has everything to lose. She's going to act in a very different way than somebody who's running the border, smugglers, fugitives. Those people do act in a very aggressive way. Spending my whole life in Arizona and traveling back and forth to Mexico all the time, those are the people that I personally am terrified of. My family was out at the sand dunes in Yuma, maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago. I can't remember exactly when it was, when a Border Patrol agent was gunned down, a young dad, by some drug runners who were apprehended. They had nothing to lose, right? And Border Patrol, that's what they're used to dealing with. So that's what their gut response is. That's their reflexes. They're not used to dealing with law abiding citizens who act a little bit differently. So the cities are becoming zones of enforcement. They're no longer communities. That's why this feels militarized. That's why they're dressed in the tactical gear. That's why they have the masks and the helmets and all of their weapons just like brandished in very visible ways, because that's what they need when they are along the border, which is what they were designed to be for. That's where they're supposed to be. That's why we're seeing this disconnect from the Border Patrol and the ICE agents from the local values. They don't even give one rat's ass what the governor or these peaceful protesters or anybody says. And that's why people are getting hurt. Now, technically, the Constitution still applies in all cases. In theory, agents still need probable cause. In theory, they can't just enter homes without a judge-signed warrant. In theory, peaceful protest is protected and they can do nothing about it, and they can't arrest or harm peaceful protesters. But in practice, when you combine broad federal authority with border-style tactics, you create what civil liberties groups have been warning about for years. And this is so important. Keep this in your mind, write this down. What's happening in Minneapolis right now is showing us, underscoring this huge accountability gap. And that's just hard baked into the system. It needs to be corrected. There's a few people who like the system how it is right now because they're using it to their advantage. They can say, this, we have the right to do this. And that's the president, Kristi Noem, and Greg Bovino here. We're seeing that accountability gap play out right now. And it's this duel between Governor Walsh, who just said the state is going to investigate the killing of this young man, and the federal government, and Kristi Noem. Kristi Noem just said, nope, this is us. We're looking into this. By the way, it's really significant that Kristi Noem, when she was asked directly if Alex had been brandishing a weapon, she said he had a weapon. And nobody goes to the scene of a protest with a weapon and all of that ammunition unless they have the intent to do harm. She is making an assumption about his intent. According to all videos, according to all eyewitnesses, he was not brandishing that weapon. That weapon wasn't discovered until the ICE agents already had him on the ground. They then took the weapon out of his pocket before they ended his life. But Kristi Noem just tap danced around that like Fred Astaire. So Border Patrol doesn't answer to the mayor. They don't answer to the city council. They don't answer to the local police chief. They answer to nobody but DHS in Washington. So when something goes wrong, who do you complain to? Who do you vote out? Who disciplines them? That's the gap. That's the accountability gap. And that is everything that's happening right now in Minnesota. And this is why it's so dangerous in places like this small community in Minneapolis. Not because immigration laws exist, it's a fairly effective system out here on the border, where agents need to be trained in the fact that, yeah, you're going to be attacked in ways that you wouldn't ordinarily in the city. I was reading through some Border Patrol training material that I found online where they talk about how everything can be weaponized, even the river by the border, because it's polluted water. So, they're going to try to get bacteria in your mouth by splashing water at you. Everything is a weapon. And this border enforcement culture is being dropped into civilian life in what are ordinarily peaceful neighborhoods. So, Border Patrol may be legally allowed to operate inland, but they are being used in ways they were never designed for. Minnesota protesters are being treated like people in wild rural border zones. And when border tactics meet city streets, the result is fear, force, and a massive accountability problem. And this guy right here, this guy is the problem. He does not belong in Minneapolis. So I just want to get a little bit personal for a minute here because I've been deep diving this Yahoo for a while. Greg Bovino's title, he is a U.S. Border Patrol chief. Specifically, he has been the chief patrol agent of the El Centro sector in California. That makes him a senior commander within Customs and Border Protection, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. Again, these are the Homeland Security officers who are supposed to be along the border. So he is not ICE, and people are using the wrong verbiage. We're talking about him as though he is ICE. He is Border Patrol leadership. So why is he in Minnesota? He's there because DHS has deployed Border Patrol leadership and agents inland to support federal immigration operations. In plain English, DHS is using border control as a national surge force, not as the border fence, our borders and our shores that they are trained and designed to be. Bovino is there because he is a commander overseeing or supporting these operations, not because Minnesota is near the border. It's not. It's about 220 miles from the border. This isn't the only time that this has happened. This will sometimes happen when DHS wants more manpower than just ICE has, or wants a more aggressive enforcement posture, wants experienced command staff to run larger operations like what they're doing in Minnesota. So they brought Greg in because he's, top commander. And when they want that really visible law and order presence, they will bring in the Border Patrol agent. Greg Bovino grew up in North Carolina in the sticks. He was the son of Italian immigrants. His dad went to jail when he was 11 years old. He owned a bar. He drove bat ass drunk home from work one day, head on collision. Oh, my voice with a young couple, and a 26-year-old woman was killed in that collision. Her husband was critically injured. He did survive. So dad goes to jail when he's 11 years old, loses the bar, financially destitute, and mom leaves with the kids. So he has this disrupted childhood, and somewhere along the line, he was watching a movie about a Border Patrol agent, and he said that from that time on, he wanted to be a Border Patrol agent because the movie showed these guys as the bad guys, and he felt like they were the good guys. And so he wanted to be Border Patrol so that he could prove that that's a good job. I'll drop a link to this in the description here. Greg Bovino's Border Patrol agents use disproportionate force, data shows. Border Patrol agents in the El Centro sector have reported using force on other people more than 3 times as many times as they have faced assault, a ratio higher than anywhere else in the agency, according to federal data. A high-ranking and highly scrutinized Border Patrol official has presided over a disproportionate amount of use of force incidents. Gregory Bovino, the chief of the Border Patrol's El Centro sector in California, has been in charge of the controversial Department of Homeland Security raids in Chicago and Los Angeles, has been leading federal agents accused of excessive violence against migrants, protesters, journalists, and others in these operations. A federal judge just last week said these agents' use of force in Chicago shocks the conscience. To justify their use of force, Bovino and other senior DHS leaders have cited assaults against federal law enforcement. It's not a new argument for Bovino. He told congressional staffers in 2023 that the use of force by agents when agents are assaulted does happen. But federal data from the last 4 fiscal years shows that under Bovino's leadership, Border Patrol agents in the El Centro sector have used force far more often than they've faced assault. For every assault they've faced, El Centro agents have used force over 3.6 times, according to the data. Across the Border Patrol, use of force incidents outpace assaults on agents by just a 2-to-1 ratio, but El Centro's data reflects the highest ratio of use of force to assault of any other Border Patrol sector in the nation, far higher than the other 19 sectors and the Border Patrol overall. From 2022 to 2025, there were 300 incidents of agents using force out of El Centro sector and 83 incidences of assault against agents, according to the data. So as a whole, the data shows around 2,900 use of force incidents, and only 1,400 assault incidents. The ratio of El Centro sector agents under Greg Bovino using force versus being assaulted is more than double the Border Patrol-wide ratio. The Director of Defense was consulted for this article, and he wrote that El Centro is an outlier. No other sector comes close to El Centro in use of force incidents per apprehensions. And that right there is exactly why Kristi Noem and President Trump want this man on the ground leading and overseeing this operation. Here's just some weird personal stuff. He has social media that's pretty big, his Instagram, where he plays all this weird ass gangster music showing himself going out and nabbing immigrants. Like this video here, the music is just wild. All of the songs that he puts as background tracks for what he's doing. It's Start a Riot, and I don't know all the lyrics, but it's violent and it's just this whole fuck you soundtrack. I'll link this article in the description too. Jen Budd, a former Border Patrol senior agent who worked with him and has been a longtime critic, thinking that he should not be doing his job, calls Bovino the Liberace of the Border Patrol because he's so flamboyant, because he has camera crews that trail him on raids, producing and distributing videos of aggressive immigration busts. She says he echoes right wing views, which obviously you would anticipate. Here's a quote from Bud. He's just a little Napoleon who wants you to think that he was a hero and the most moral and capable guy in the world, and everything around you is dangerous, she said in an interview. But he's the one who's going to save you. It's all a show for him. And that's pretty much what you see on his social media. He's making a big show of going in and saving people. Another former agent who had worked with him said that before he went out on like his shifts, that he would watch Rocky because he thought that Rocky was just so awesome. It got him all pumped up to go out there. And again, I know that there are a lot of people who are commenting on the legal aspects of this, who are commenting on the larger political factors. But for me, as someone who grew up in this community, who was MAGA, who was alt-right, who was a white supremacist and very into the use of force to keep America safe for God's people, having come from all of this myself, I always like to kind of bring in that personal factor. Who are the individuals behind this? We see everything happening on the streets of Minnesota, but this one little guy is fairly important. This little dude who had a fairly traumatic childhood, who grew up in a mobile home park in the backwoods somewhere, no offense to mobile home parks, it's a very valid economic way to live. This lonely little guy whose life felt very unsafe found a way to feel like he was making the world safer by becoming a border patrol agent, and he's turned it into his whole entire identity. It is noteworthy that I couldn't find a single relationship that he's ever been in. I've perused through multiples of his social medias, some that he doesn't use anymore. I don't ever see him even going on a date. There aren't even whispers that he's been with anybody. He's not married. If anybody finds out anything different, please let me know. And this man is directly overseeing his agents and these operations as Trump's right-hand man on the ground in Minnesota. And it's leading to atrocities against American citizens. I also find it funny, just on a side note, that bovino is the word for cow in Italian, and it can also be used as a slur for somebody who's, like, dumb and slow of mind. So I definitely think that he was born into the right name, but guys like this and the agents that he's overseeing absolutely do not belong in an urban center at all. They don't. And it's time that we, moving forward as Americans, put the Border Patrol in its proper place so that we can keep our citizens safe, because the people at the top right now, Kristi Noem and President Trump and everybody else, they are in no hurry to end this. I guess let me end with that. As a 51-year-old who's spent my whole life in America, what I'm shocked by is that I'm not seeing any type of moves to actually de escalate what's happening in Minneapolis. After the Renee Good shooting, when President Trump and Kristi Noem and Greg Bovino heard the outcry of the people and saw the protests, they should have had a reassessment. Yes, we are a democratic republic. The people aren't liking this. This isn't sitting well. So maybe it's time to reassess and redirect, and maybe we need to go in a different direction. What would that direction be? Maybe we should have some town halls and listen to, maybe we should sit down with Governor Walsh. That's one idea, and ask, how do you guys propose that we get some of these so-called hardened criminals out of your state? Although I was watching them talk today about one hardened criminal that they had apprehended, and he had been charged with disrupting the peace and then evading arrest. And it's like, I've probably disrupted the peace. I've never evaded arrest. I've never been arrested, but these aren't murderers and human traffickers on the most part that they're going after. These operations should not be continuing to go on. They are harming their citizens. And I personally believe that they're doing it intentionally. I think the president is watching the news at night while Melania rubs his feet and just laughing his head off at all the power he has, all of the chaos that he's causing. And Greg Bovino, he thinks that he can go out here on the streets of Minnesota and put on his fancy Yahtzee trench coat and look like power and just radiate authority. But man, we all know what type of little D man is underneath that coat. We've met you before. You are our brother, our ex-boyfriend. Like, we know you. We've got you, buddy. We all got your number, and we're not falling for it. Greg Bovino spends more of his life arguing with people because he's been forced by other people in the department to take down tweets and posts because they were too political. And then he talks to the news about that, like, I was forced to take this post down. He spends more time throwing little baby tantrums about his social media than trying to grow a soul, which clearly developmentally didn't happen. Anyway, in conclusion, my granddad had a saying that keeps coming to mind as I watch all these guys in this current regime that's in charge of all of us in America, holding us all hostage under this dictatorship. It was birds of a feather flock together. And we're seeing that right now play out in real life in really harmful ways. The president loves this guy. They're all alike. And if we can ever wrestle power back from these guys, we need to never, ever give it back to them again. Thanks for watching. I'll be laying in bed and watching the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Bye.